Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the upload here on WNYU 89.1 FM. I'm your host, Michael Batavia, and welcome to Season 2. We had a great time dealing with a whole series of guests for Season 1, particularly one with the same guy over and over again, but I'll allow it because he was an interesting person. But this time, we're not just focused on talking to innovators, we're also talking to people who have expertise in making innovation happen in public and private sectors. And the one person I found who has an excellent article on this, along with his colleague Zach Graves at the R Street Institute, is Kevin Kosar, a research fellow at the American Enterprise Institute and said VP of Research Partnerships at the R Street Institute. He's also a founder of legbranch.org, which is an online hub for congressional reform and scholarship. And your expertise is basically on studying Congress, its reforms, its effect, and sort of its portrayal on how it can get stuff done by the American people. Is there anything else that I forgot or you'd like to add?
No, it was a very capacious entry. I guess the only thing I would throw out there is that I am also the host of the Understanding Congress podcast, which is a nonpartisan explainer podcast that, for anybody who is taking classes in American national government or courses on Congress, the format is I pick a topic like how does the congressional budget process work and not work, and then I interview an expert who explains it to you. So it's a really great hack for learning stuff very quickly.
Yeah, I truly imagine that because looking through all those like acronyms for all those governmental organizations, I need to quickly Google and check what these truly mean. So that, yeah, definitely. We'll come back to that when I'm promoting you at the end. But yeah, I think it's truly a great listen. Now, moving on to your piece, I think the whole kind of claim you were making is that Congress, I might be saying it a little bit too harshly, but perhaps Congress is a bit technologically illiterate. Would you say that's being too harsh, or?
No, it's not being too harsh. We are a representative democracy. We are not ruled by a caste of mandarins who are trained from birth to be policy wonks and to, make expert-based policy. Congress is a place that anybody can get elected to it. You could be a used car salesman. You could be a small town mayor. You could be a gun shop owner. You could be just about anything. But when you get here, you are going to be saddled with responsibilities over a vast array of complex policy areas. Everything from agricultural policy to banking policy to zoological related stuff. And within that niche is technology. And while all policy areas are complex, things involving science and technology are exceedingly complex because developments are moving so quickly. And the average citizen, which members of Congress are largely average citizens, can't possibly be expected to keep up. They just can't. And so when it comes to tech policy, yeah, a representative democracy is going to have some distinct challenges in kind of making policy that's good, that works.
Yeah, I definitely can imagine having to learn all of these sorts of technical skills, especially as you said, if they're evolving at a breakneck pace and having to keep up. One interesting point you made is that you said that over the past two decades, Congress's technical capacity has decreased. Is it largely due to that pace, or is it due to perhaps some other reason?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think it's as a baseline matter, if you look at Congress over the last, 100 years, pick a baseline, you looked at the members of Congress, the number of individuals who were either inventors of technology or worked in tech businesses are very few. So demographically, the body just doesn't have a lot of those. It does have a lot of lawyers. It has a significant number of farmers. I mean, some issue areas do have a certain level of representation. 40 years ago, we also had a lot of members who were former members of the U.S. military, which was valuable for them to assess in assessing military policy. They could bring that experience to it. So you've got this low baseline. Very few tech people get elected to Congress. You also have, as a baseline, very few people who study tech going to work as congressional staff. People who study tech tend to go elsewhere, typically places that are more lucrative, and places that are more focused on tech itself. So you've got that as a baseline. But what we highlighted in this paper about bringing in the nerds, as it's called, is that Congress used to have something called the Office of Technology Assessment. This was like a little think tank of nonpartisan nerds, 120, 140 of them that they created in 1972. And the job of these people was to write reports that looked at recent and emerging technologies and just try to figure out what are the implications, kind of help politicians see over the horizon about like what this is going to mean and what ripple effects could occur. And it was a great agency, but unfortunately it was zeroed out in 1995, which ironically was the dawn of the World Wide Web era. So yeah, Congress harmed itself by getting rid of, about 140 civil servants who were there producing materials that helped them educate themselves on complicated topics.
Yeah, that is very, very ironic. But exactly as you said, the OTA was like, the cut because of funding. And also you said it had like terse and long reports. There's kind of this thing in Congress that no one they recently passed the omnibus spending bill that was like, I think 700 pages or something like that. I think a common complaint of the OTA was that some of the Congress people didn't really want to read those long reports. But is like, if the OTA were revived in some way, like how would you go about changing that? Would you just like how do you shorten the report so that people read them, or like make it as nonpartisan of a read?
Yeah. I mean, the OTA reports, there was this knock that was put out there by some that, oh, well, nobody reads these reports. Well, is that an indictment of OTA or is that an indictment of Congress? That's the first thing I would bring up. If you're putting wisdom and facts and analyses before folks, but they're refusing to take them, does that mean you get rid of the wisdom, analysis, and facts? No, you should shame the people into using it. So that's my first response. The second response is that, members of Congress are insanely busy. I mean, today the average member of the House has 760,000 constituents. And these are all the voters are supposed to understand and somehow represent. They've got bazillions of interest groups coming to them. They've got to raise money for reelection. I mean, the amount of time they have to think deeply is quite limited. So they can only get deep on a certain number of things, which means the job of thinking deeply often rolls over onto staff. Staff are like extra brains for Congress. And Congress right now doesn't have enough staff, but staff read the OTA reports and they would write up short briefing things for members. OTA died or was killed off by Congress before the web and web video had emerged. So one could imagine if you revived OTA today, you would still want to do the long white papers, but then you'd want to take those and do derivative versions in video, infographics, I don't want to say HTML shorts, but, web-based native publications that look good on a phone, that are shorter and digest the takeaways. Absolutely. That's what you'd want to do. But you'd still want to have the core of people in there that you had before, who were the nonpartisan civil servants, who importantly, as part of their work process, reached out to university, executive branch, and private industry experts and kind of yoked or wikied that knowledge into the process of thinking this through.
Yeah, that's an excellent response. I definitely think that is something that really should be done. It kind of, what you said kind of reminds me of kind of the processes that several types of cryptocurrencies make. Like you have Bitcoin, which is the original crypto with the white paper, and then you have all its several derivatives. They all have white papers. But if you view each of their corresponding websites, to those who have any idea of what the hell it is, you'd kind of be able to get a better gist of it than having to like, go through have a background in math and RSA and other things like that.
Yeah, there are always, a part of representative democracy, and for anybody in the audience who was required to read Jean-Jacques Rousseau, the political philosopher, like one of the things he emphasizes about democracy and self-rule is that it's an enduring educational effort. We're all learning together. You may have a bunch of smarties in Congress for a period of time, but guess what? They're going to move out of Congress. Either they're going to die or they're going to leave for other reasons. And so you have to kind of relearn stuff. And if you look at politics and policy through that sort of lens, then you kind of see the value in having nonpartisan core of experts who can provide a sort of institutional memory, longstanding civil servants who are there for 30, 40 years, and who know a topic cold, and who can school people just the same way university professors can school students who come through and then move on. And also, the importance of that whenever you've got people trying to govern themselves, you're dealing with multiple audiences. You'll have people who are longer in the tooth and more expert in stuff. And then you'll have people who are brand new, who don't know anything about the topic, in which case white papers might be good for those who really know a topic or really are passionate about it. Little primers spun off are better for people who are new to it. And those can breadcrumb people to the deeper knowledge if that's the path they want to follow.
Yeah, I totally agree about that. And I think those primers would really help, like when you bring in those experts, when they kind of cross-analyze those people on the Hill, that kind of helps rather than like asking a question, oh, my daughter had an inappropriate message come up on her iPhone. And if you're asking that to Sundar Pichai, probably not the best question to ask.
Yeah, I mean, imagine, you get elected to Congress. So Michael Batavia comes to Washington, D.C., and he's in this wonderful ornate dome. And all of a sudden, a legislator who's been around 15 years comes and says, yeah, I've got this new piece of legislation, hands you a stack about 3 inches tall, and says, the idea is it's going to improve the funding status of Medicare, parts A, B, C, D, along with some other stuff. Can I have your vote on this? Well, first, do you want to just say yes? No, you want to figure this out. Well, if you start trying to read this document, you're probably going to be baffled. So who do you turn to? Well, guess what? There's probably a lobbyist somewhere nearby who'd love to get in your ear and give you his perspective on behalf of some deep-pocketed interest. Wouldn't it be nice if you could talk to a civil servant, somebody who is not ideological, who doesn't have a skin in the game, who's expert in the area, and who can kind of say, hey, I'm not going to tell you what to do. As an expert, I can advise you on the options, the costs and benefits, and the history here, and I can explain the minutia, but you ultimately decide it. Like, ta-da, that's the legislative branch support agencies. OTA was one of them. Government Accountability Office is another one. Congressional Research Service, where I worked for more than a decade, is another. And that's what these agencies do. They kind of address this inherent defect of democracy, which is legislators are amateur and you need to learn up on stuff, but governance is complicated. And getting it wrong means imposing costs on other people.
Your thought is very entertaining. Well, I would like to be in that ornate dome. I have been to DC many times. Probably would not like to have that responsibility to read all of those the big stack of papers. I get what you're saying, that Congress people are very busy. And there was a point made in Congress that like when you have a 700-page bill, perhaps we should read some of it rather than just like, having to summarize and find like egregious things. So yeah, you exactly said that the Congressional Research Service, the Government Accountability Office, they're kind of filling in the gap at this point because of the OTA discontinuation. I think about one point you kind of raised in this the OTA papers that it can't fully bridge the gap. There's I think you said because it was the lack of funding. I can't properly recall what reason you gave.
Right. Well, yeah. So, I mean, OTA by its nature had a unique culture. Its staff was heavily drawn from the science and academic community. And, you put all those people together and they create their own kind of nerdy culture, which again was very much not on kind of current event stuff, but it was on like long-term over the horizon assessments of interesting technological and scientific developments. And these were things that they were tasked by a board in Congress, a board of senators and representatives, with studying. That sort of culture is not the same culture that you have at the Government Accountability Office. The Government Accountability Office, first and foremost, was it created to engage in kind of government accountancy, to follow the money, to track the dollars, and later evolved to kind of assessing whether the dollars were having real productive effects or whether the programs were just not working. And the GAO also has a lot of lawyers who look into legal issues about agencies and how they use money and did they use it for appropriate purposes under the law. It's just a different culture and a different bunch of people. Congressional Research Service, yeah, it's a think tank, absolutely, but it is a think tank that's really closely tethered to kind of Congress's day-to-day needs. When I was an analyst at CRS, almost every day I would have at least one email or phone call come from a congressional staff or a member who were dealing with something that was frequently a pressing matter. Hey, this bill was introduced. It's got this weird provision about the U.S. Postal Service. Do you have any idea what this means? Okay, I'd drop everything and I would look it over and be like, oh, yes, this is what this is about. So for that kind of long, deep divey research, and plus having those network connections that with universities and the executive branch scientists and all that, CRS people don't really have that. That's not how the place was staffed. So trying to take this OTA function and graft it onto CRS and GAO, it's just inherently challenging. In the private sector, it's the same deal. You see these giant mergers, between companies like content producers versus the internet highways type companies like, hey, we can have content in the highways and deliver them together. Well, often doesn't work out because culturally they are different. And that's the issue here. And, Congress could have revived OTA. That's what some of us were advocating. But what they ended up doing ultimately was assigning this duty to the Government Accountability Office. They have a new division called the STAA. It's been up and running a couple years, and whether it's going to be successful remains to be seen. It really does. They've staffed up. They got more than 100 people, but whether it will work, it's anyone's guess.
Yeah, I could see that. I think several of the component parts of the OTA are kind of spread off across not just Congress, but also like the Supreme Court with its antitrust lawsuits. Yeah, definitely parts of the Congressional Research Service. That could have been a very, very good segue into ending. But I do want to ask this one question because you kind of teased at it earlier. It's that kind of the election of more like younger members of Congress, like Maxwell Frost, I guess if you can count AOC. Do you believe that like they might be more fitted with knowledge of more modern technology to assist in kind of like the technological knowledge transfer to older members?
Yeah, the kind of digital natives. Certainly, they are more comfortable with this sort of stuff. We still have at least one senator, I believe it's New York's Chuck Schumer, who carries a flip phone because that's where he's at. But so culturally, yeah, they're going to be more in tune to the kind of internet and more recent technologies. You think that 30 years ago, if somebody wanted to figure out their genealogy, they were left going through dusty books. Now you can, lick a Q-tip and drop it in the mail and you can get a DNA analysis. Like that's normal for people of your age. For me, it's innovative. And for people older than me, it's kind of amazing and baffling at the same time. So yeah. I think this is going to help. But we shouldn't forget that, when Chuck Schumer was a young pup, and some of these other gray hairs were young pups, they were also on the edge of cutting edge technology of the day. A facsimile machine, like that was invented when Chuck Schumer was young. And, there were members of Congress who were absolutely baffled by facsimiles. How could this possibly work? Um, and we just laugh in retrospect. So yeah, but the private sector is inevitably just going to be plunging forward faster and faster, and Congress, even if you have a lot of young people who are young and savvy and excited about tech stuff, it's still going to be a super steep learning curve. It's just going to be, because this stuff gets more and more complex. It really does.
The organization that's kind of a subsection of the Government Accountability Office is called the STAA, or
Correct. STAA. Science, Technology, Assessment and Analysis, something of that ilk. They have a little subpage on the GAO.gov site that highlights some of their work, but because they have really just launched this in the last 2 years and are staffing up, the amount of materials that you could see there are limited. Some of it certainly looks promising. For example, there's a explainer on 5G technology. What is this stuff? A lot of us have that on our phone, but we don't think twice about it. But there are a lot of conspiracy theories about 5G out there. And members of Congress hear from these people. And so this is the sort of thing that, can be useful to them. But that's not quite what OTA was up to, creating short explainers to help members deal with crank theories.
Yeah, we have the primer without the white paper.
Yes, indeed. So no, it's it's an age-old story. Remember the myth of Vulcan and Hephaestus and the gods punishing him because he brought the technology of fire to humankind. And oh my goodness, what will these humans do with fire? And turns out, some good things, but a lot of bad things. So it is with technological developments. Crypto, fascinating development. Massive financial implosion due to some issues. Now there are calls for regulation. Will we get regulation? Should we have regulation? Can the regulation actually be rational and constructive? I don't know. It's a complicated conversation, and Congress is certainly not well schooled on the topic.
Yeah, I was planning to ask a follow-up question, but I didn't realize the relative youth of the STAA. So I guess we'll have to wait and see with regards to whether its effect on innovation, on whether it's going to more regulated or foster. I think you said it excellently in the paper. Yeah, legal and regulatory frameworks, as well as the norms and attitudes of policymakers and adapting them, are a matter of life and death. Ooh, what scary wording.
Yeah. When you're scared, it's very tempting to say, well, there should be a rule to stop this scary thing from happening. And so I think with technology, we've had a lot of scares. Oh, we should just ban this. We should just stop this. We should make this go away. And that's not healthy policy. You would hope as people get schooled up, educated on this stuff, you have, learning conversations on Capitol Hill informed by people who know what they're talking about, as opposed to people, scaremongers or something like that. You could then come to a more rational assessment about, okay, if we regulate this, how should we regulate this? As opposed to just doing something brash that turns out to be very, very dumb. So yeah, no, I think, there is real value in learning something before trying to do something about something. Crazy, right?
Yeah, I think I'm of that philosophy as well. I just try to learn what I can and debate, try to use facts if possible, not succumb to just brash things as well. I mean, Congress is trying its best, and we give it crap, but it's doing things, and it's supporting us in it's supporting the growth of the nation in some certain ways. So I think altogether, this chapter of history, the OTA, was, I think, very, very fascinating, and it was great to read that piece and to learn all about it. And it's a very, very, very interesting conversation with you, Mr. Kosar. Just before we go, is there anything you'd like to promote or to add?
No, I would very much love it if folks would tune into the Understanding Congress podcast. When I was in my 20s, I didn't give a darn about Congress, and I thought the place was pointless. What I kind of realized as I got a little older is that, you know what, if we want to have a democratic republic, a place where we actually govern ourselves, where the great diversity of this country can kind of work stuff out with one another and come to agreements that we all can live with, the place to do that is Congress. Expecting policy on difficult issues like immigration to be made by a president or the high court, that doesn't really fit with the idea of democratic self-rule. And, appreciating Congress for all its vices and virtues, I think, is important. And certainly the more people who care about Congress, the more people who reach out to Congress and tell Congress what you think, the better Congress is going to do at its job.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. It kind of applies a little bit to sort of the citizen science projects happening. If you help out with a project, you could, I think, kind of reconstructing maybe the structure of enzymes, you could really help out. And especially, if you tell Congress, if you're really interested and you write them the primer yourself, that'd probably help out the STAA. And again, we'll see definitely where that goes in the future. And if you happen to write on it, I'm happy to have you back to talk about it. But thank you so much, Mr. Kosar. Again, this is our first episode of season 2 of The Upload. We're going to have lots of great guests in the future. I'm your host, Michael Batavia. Hope you have a great night, the ones you love. See you then.